POV Italian Cooking, where you see cooking from my point of view. And don't forget, we're associated with Simply Good Food TV, where you can find all of our episodes on their app. I'll put a link below. In today's episode, we're going to make Coccodrillo bread, which means crocodile bread. But before we talk about the bread, I first want to say this is the first episode that I've recorded in a couple months. So at the beginning, I'm not back in the groove of things. I'm a little stiff, and I'm, as my wife says, I'm giving a presentation instead of, filming an episode or talking to the camera. So you'll see that by the end of it, I kind of get back into the groove and whatnot. Now let's get back to today's episode. Now this bread was developed about 30 years ago in Rome. You'll notice when I'm making the bread, sometimes I call this Crocodrillo bread. The correct pronunciation is Coccodrillo bread. But at any rate, this bread is made using an unbleached all-purpose flour and semolina durum flour. Now we're going to talk more about that when we're going over our ingredients. In the past, I've not had any success making bread. So one day I just made up my mind. I was determined I was going to figure out how to bake bread and just go crazy with it. And that's kind of what I've done here lately. I've been baking tons and tons of bread. In this episode, the Coccodrillo bread is one of the more difficult breads. It takes, I call it a 4-day bread. Day 1, you make a starter. Day 2, you add a few ingredients. Day 3, you do nothing. And day 4, you actually make the bread. And it's a very difficult bread. The dough is wet. It's hard to handle. It's hard to fold. But at any rate, if you can successfully make Coccodrillo bread, you're going to have no problems making some of the more simple breads that we'll see in some future episodes. So I've talked long enough. Let's get started and take a look at our ingredients. I want to start by taking a look at the ingredients for our Coccodrillo bread. As with most breads, the ingredients are very few and very simple. Our first ingredient is a ½ teaspoon of active dry yeast, not the instant yeast, but the active yeast, and also 1 cup of warm water. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drop my yeast into the water, kind of stir it up a little bit with my finger so we can get our yeast to bloom. Dry my finger off real quick. So the next ingredient is 3/4 cups of unbleached all-purpose flour. Now this bread does call for unbleached flour, so let's talk about the difference between bleached and unbleached. A bleached flour, if you just go and buy your average all-purpose flour, there's a chemical bleaching process that's used that really prepares or it ages the flour within 48 hours and you get that nice bright white flour. Now with an unbleached flour, it's a natural bleaching process that is where the flour lightens or becomes more white like we see here over a 12-day drying process. Now, the chemical bleaching process kind of makes the flour softer, the glutens aren't as strong, it kind of washes out some of the proteins. You don't get that with an unbleached flour. Your unbleached flour, you're going to get more structure, it's going to be a little more dense, it's going to have more body. So it's important that we use unbleached flour. Also in this bread we have a 1/4 cup of semolina durum flour. This is a flour or a wheat that's native to Europe, around the Mediterranean region. I don't know if you can see this or not very well in the camera, but it is a yellow flour. It's a little coarse. It's kind of looks like a fine cornmeal. Now, this is semolina durum flour, not semolina, what they call semolina 00 or double aught flour that you use to make pasta. Now, this is semolina double aught flour. It's very fluffy, it's very powdery, it's white, it has a very soft, pillowy texture. This is great for making pasta. For this bread, it's not what we want. As I shared in the introduction, the starter for this bread takes 3 days and we bake it on the 4th day. A lot of folks will say, oh my gosh, it's going to take too much time. No, day 1 couldn't be more simple. What we're going to do is we're going to add both of our flours together, and we're just going to go ahead and kind of stir them together, just mix them up just a little bit. You don't have to sift these together. You can just do a quick stir. Now the only thing left to add is the water and yeast mixture. Now this water is not quite ready yet. You can see that it's not creamy. It's not, the yeast has not yet bloomed. So we need to wait 4 or 5 more minutes.
So through the magic of editing, it's been 10 minutes. Our yeast is ready. You can see that the water's clear. It's a little bit cloudy. This means our yeast has bloomed. If after 10 minutes you don't see a cloudiness, you don't see some activity, your yeast is dead, pour it down the sink, start over. It's important that you use warm water. It should feel warm on the back of your hand. Ideally, your water should be between 100 and 110 degrees. If it's hotter than that, your yeast will die. It will not bloom, and you just got to start over. If it's too cold, it just takes longer for the yeast. So this next step, really simple. Actually, the last step. We just pour our water in, our water and yeast mixture, and then we just stir this up. You want this to smooth out, so like brownies, they say, you want to stir your brownies
50 times. That's kind of what you want to do here. Just get it all mixed together.
You can kind of see here that our lumps are starting to disappear. You really don't need a stand mixer day one. There might be a few lumps left. We're not going to worry about those. What I'm going to do is just kind of scrape the sides a little bit, get this all to the center. We're going to let this set covered with plastic for 24 hours. And when we come back, it'll be tomorrow, and we'll do the next step. Hey, it's day 2 of our Crocodrillo bread, crocodile bread. So, you may not be able to catch this on the camera very well, so I've got a smaller camera here. What I want you to see is what we did yesterday is all bubbly, and that's what you want to see. It has to be bubbly. Let me pull it over here. So I don't know if you can see that or not, but that is our crocodile bread. Day 1, our day 1 starter. Now for our day 2 starter, real simple. What I have here is a 1/4 cup of warm water, and in that water I have 1 1/4 teaspoons of active dry yeast, and I put it in, it's been 10 minutes, so you can see it's real foamy. In addition to our yeast in a 1/4 cup of water, I have 1 1/4 cup of room temperature water, a 1/2 cup of the semolina durum flour, and 1 1/2 cups of our unbleached flour, just unbleached all-purpose flour, and all we're going to do is mix it right into our day 1 starter. So we take our starter. I am going to first dump in my yeast, and the reason I'm going to dump that in first is I want to make sure I get all of my yeast out of my cup here because it's all nice and bubbly and slimy. So I'm just going to put our room temperature water in, dump in all of our flours. Again, that's a 1/4 cup of the semolina durum flour, 1 1/2 cup of all-purpose unbleached flour, and I'm already making a mess. Isn't that great? The semolina flour can be hard to find. Guy said yesterday, you can get it on Amazon. Everybody goes to Amazon if you can't find something. There may be some specialty stores in your area that carry it as well. So what we're going to do is we're just going to stir this until we get a nice smooth batter.
When we do, we're just going to put our plastic wrap back on the top. Now, day 3 is even easier. Do nothing. Let it set. Let it bubble. Let it stew. Day 4, when we come back, we do have a little bit of work to do on day 4. We'll talk about that on day 4. So once this moves out, I'll put my plastic wrap on. But we're done with day 2. I'll see you on day 4. This is day 4 on our Crocodrillo bread. Today's the day that we mix everything together, let it rise, and put it in the oven. So our ingredients for day 4 is 1 cup of unbleached all-purpose flour, a 1/4 cup of our semolina durum flour, and 1 1/2 tablespoons of salt. I like to use sea salt. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at our starter. Get the plastic off the top of this. Now you may not be able to see, I've got a little camera here so I can try to catch this. It's very foamy. It's bubbly, it's gooey. That's exactly how it should look. So we are ready to get started. Now what I want to do here, let me get this plastic out of the way, just throw it there behind me. Just going to take our rubber spatula, scrape it all down in here. We've got that all scraped out of our bowl. I'm going to set it here. Now I'm going to use a paddle mixer. For most of your breads, you will use this thing's whipping my butt. All right, we're going to use a paddle mixer instead of a dough hook because this dough is very, very moist. So that's all we're going to do there. So now all I want to do is get my mixer turned on to the lowest speed. This has to mix for 15 minutes.
What I usually like to do is once I get it mixing, I may stop once or twice and kind of scrape everything off the paddle. But let's just get this going. So we've got everything locked down. We're going to start that. We are going to come in first with our durum flour. We're just going to pour it in slow. Then we're going to come in with our all-purpose flour. Pour it in slowly. You can see that that is really, really moist. Now I'm just going to let this go for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, that's when we come in with our salt. I'm not going to stand here for 15 minutes and just chit-chat with you while this is mixing. We're just going to break away. We'll come back 15 minutes. It has been 15 minutes. So what we're going to do is first we're going to scrape this dough down off of our paddle once again. Make sure you let this go for 15 minutes. It really does need that time. You know, it's very important to knead the bread. And really, since this is so wet, you know, the best you can do is knead it with a paddle. Now, if you do not have a mixer, you're looking at a 25 to 30 minute mix manually with a wooden spoon. So now we're going to turn that back on, and while it's going, we're going to take our salt and just kind of sprinkle it in here. And we're going to let that go for about 3 to 5 minutes. Now I will stop my mixer one more time, scrape everything off from it, probably in about 2 minutes. So our dough has been mixing for 5 minutes. While I was away, you missed a lot of fun. The cap came off the front of my KitchenAid, where the attachments go, the guard, and it fell down in and jammed. And so it was humming and just a lot of fun. So anyway, we're going to scrape this now off of our paddle. It's kind of looks like, I don't know if you guys, if you're about my age, remember the old 80s show The Blob, or the movie The Blob, the horror movie? It's kind of what this kind of looks like. It's a wet dough. If you have another bread dough that's this wet, you probably need to add more flour, but this is that one time where this is the way it's supposed to look. Now, the one thing that you want to do to make sure this dough rises is you want to get a bowl on top of like a cooling rack, so that way air can circulate all the way around it. We're just going to scrape this in. We're not even going to worry about oiling this. Most of the time, if you're for your first rise on your bread and you put it in a covered bowl, you want to oil it. You don't have to worry about it with this crazy Crocodrillo bread. We're just going to pour that in there. And what I'm going to do is cover it with a towel. Now, one thing I like to do, because we keep our house a little bit cool, is I will run hot water over this towel, wring it out the best I can, and then just kind of wrap it up around this bowl. And I'll do that from time to time. Now, this has to raise for 5 hours. It's a long, slow raise. What we're looking for is it's going to probably triple in size, at least double in size, if not triple. It takes 4 to 5 hours. So I've got my towel wet. You can see I've kind of wrapped it around my bowl. One thing I did forget to mention is about every hour and a half, you want to turn the dough. Now, you don't want to punch it down and really work it a lot. Just take your rubber spatula and kind of stick it under there and just give it one flip. Then cover it back up. It's a good time to get your towel warm again. It has been 4.5 hours, so our bread should be done rising. Now, I have turned this as I was supposed to do. We did probably start on the most difficult bread to make. Now, it's not difficult because there's a lot of ingredients, or it takes a lot to do. You know, it's 3 ingredients and you let it set for 3 days. The reason it's the most difficult bread is because it's the wettest dough. It's hard to control. Before I go and pour this out on the cabinet, again, it's going to look like the blob when we do that. I like to use this pop-up parchment paper. We're going to bake this right on the parchment paper because once we get it semi-shaped on the parchment paper, you won't be able to move it. So I'm going to get 2 pieces of parchment paper out here. I've got me some flour. I got a nice piece of parchment paper that doesn't want to cooperate. We're going to throw that out of the way and get another one. Now, I am going to put a little bit of flour on the parchment paper, again, because our dough is going to be very wet. Now, we do have to make sure we use a liberal amount of flour here on our workspace, probably a little bit more than I would normally use. And I can just throw this everywhere because when I'm done, I'm just going to walk out of the kitchen. I'm just going to let my wife clean this up. And I'll be sleeping on the couch when I do that. You see, our dough is very bubbly, but it's very, very moist. So we're just going to pour this out, use our little scraper. You can see it doesn't stick to the side. It looks like it's going to try to crawl off here. There we go. Set this off the side. Now, I am going to get my dough cutter. You don't want to use a knife on this. If you use a knife, it'll tear. It's just a standard dough cutter. You can get these at your local restaurant supply store. You can order them on Amazon, whatever. They're not that expensive. See here, I'm just going to kind of cut this dough. What did I do with my flour? I'm going to bring my flour back over. This is just, it's almost unworkable. It really is. Normally, you know, I'll show you in another video, a later video, where we'll make something much more simple, like a French bread or a como bread or something. With this, we just kind of got to get it into a round or square-like shape and get it on one of these pieces of parchment bread or paper and just be done with it. So, what I'm going to try to do here, I'm just going to pick it up, kind of work it a little bit, try to get all the big pieces where it's sticking to me underneath, and just lay it on our parchment paper. Just try to tuck it under the best you can, and this stuff is sticky. That's about as good as we're going to do. Now we are going to, after I get this one on, this will be fun. Once I get this one on the paper, we're going to let it go for a second rise for 45 minutes. About 15 minutes into our second rise, we're going to turn our oven on to 475 degrees because our oven has to warm up for a half hour. You got to get it good and warm all the way through. All right, this is really sticking to me over here, so. Again, normally when I make a bread, I don't have to have this much flour, but this stuff is just unworkable. But I'll tell you what, the flavor is really, really worth it. I'll try to get this tucked under. That's probably good enough. Now this is going to go through a second rise. I'm just going to take my towel that I had, lay it over top of it, 45 minutes. Again, don't forget, in 15 minutes, turn your oven on to 475 and let it get good and hot. I'm going to go ahead and break away and get my towel over it. Now my bread has been rising for 45 minutes. My oven's been on for 30. Now I forgot to mention that I used the same towel that I used to cover the bread during its first rise, and I did, you know, get it hot and cover it up. Now I do happen to have a pizza peel that I'm going to use to get this in and out of the oven, just to make it easier on myself. But one thing you are going to notice is that when this has been through the second rise, and it really didn't rise. It kind of spread out. It's like I said earlier, it's like the blob. But it will really cook up in the oven. Not quite that high, but it'll cook up. If you don't have a pizza peel, you can just throw these on a baking sheet and put them in the oven. I also have a baking stone in my oven, so I'm going to throw these in the oven. My oven's been preheating for 30 minutes. It's on 475 degrees. These are going to bake 30 to 35 minutes. When I get these done, we'll be back. So it has been about 30 minutes. I'm going to get my bread out of the oven. Got a little bit dark. You can see that the bread pulls right away from the parchment paper. Got a little dark in spots, but it is done. I'm going to grab the other loaf. You can see they're really puffed up. Ow. It's really, really hot. So now we're going to let this cool. And then when it cools, we're going to cut it and we're going to try it. And it's going to take a little bit to cool. I'm not going to let it cool all the way because I want it to melt the butter. But anyway, that's our bread, our Coccodrillo bread, and we'll be back as soon as this cools. So I got to share with you that I just did a tasting and the bread's really good. It's 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm really, really tired. I want to go to bed. So let's talk about this bread that I've already sliced. The crust, you can see that the bread's very porous. This is the way bread should look. You should have nice little open holes in it and whatnot. This one's got a thin crust. It doesn't have a very thick crust. Let's take a slice again. When you cut bread, let your knife do the work. It's going to rip it in half. Put a little butter on. A nice little smear of butter. Now the bread is still warm. Let's give this a taste. That is really good.
It's good.
The crust, got an immediate crunch, but it's got a really good chew on the bread. So it's 1 o'clock. I'm going to bed. Thanks for watching POV Italian Cooking. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and download the Simply Good Food TV app. And also follow us on all the major social media platforms. Thanks for watching, and ciao!